A stone giant watched over every move in a 13th century town. The bell tower was not merely a call to prayer, but the heart of a dangerous surveillance system, an instrument of control that could dictate life and death with a single peal of its bell. This system used architecture, sound, and fear to monitor entire populations, shaping the very fabric of medieval society. By the end of this journey, you will never look at a church tower the same way again. We will uncover how a structure of worship became a tool of absolute authority, and what its silent, stony gaze can teach us about power and observation today. How much of our own freedom are we willing to trade for a feeling of security? Its stone walls were not built for beauty, but for a singular, chilling purpose. Rising from the highest point of a town, the 13th century bell tower was a fortress designed for observation. The masonry was immensely thick, capable of withstanding siege, and the windows were not the grand arched openings seen in churches below. They were narrow vertical slits, just wide enough for a man to peer through. These openings, called arrow loops in military architecture, allowed the watchmen inside to survey the entire landscape without being seen themselves. From this dizzying vantage point, the watchers could see every street, every field, and every road leading into the settlement. No cart could enter the gates, no flock of sheep could be moved to pasture, and no group of people could gather without being noted from above. The tower's strategic placement was no accident. It was the nerve center of a vast sensory organ, its stony gaze sweeping across the entire community. The architecture itself was a message, a permanent declaration of power meant to intimidate as much as to protect. Before a single bell was ever rung, the sheer presence of the structure communicated a simple, terrifying fact. You are always being watched. This silent observation was the first and most fundamental layer of control. The bell tower functioned as an unblinking eye, its visual dominance absolute. From that stone perch, watchmen possessed an uninterrupted view of the entire human tapestry below. They saw more than just crowds, they witnessed the minute details of daily life. A merchant arguing over the price of grain, a servant slipping into an alleyway, a clandestine meeting in a walled garden that seemed private from the street, all were laid bare from above. This was not merely about watching for obvious crimes, it was about monitoring the flow of life itself. Every cart entering the gates was noted, its origin and cargo assessed. Every unfamiliar face in the marketplace was tracked, their movements studied for any sign of threat. The tower's gaze even reached beyond the town walls, scanning the distant roads for approaching travelers and the horizon for the telltale smoke of a wildfire or an army's campfires. This created a powerful psychological effect, an invisible panopticon where you never knew if a watchful eye was upon you at any given moment, and so you began to watch yourself. You regulated your own behavior, avoiding even the appearance of wrongdoing, not because you were always being watched, but because you might be. This self-imposed discipline, born from the simple fear of being seen, was the true genius of the system. The stone giant did not need to constantly shout its warnings. Its most potent weapon was its silence, and the unsettling possibility that at any second, that silence could be broken. But the silent gaze was only half the tower's power. Its true voice emerged with the deafening clang of the bell. This was not a simple noise, it was a sophisticated language of command, a code that every man, woman, and child in the town understood instinctively. The sound itself was the physical extension of authority, a wave of vibration that rolled over the landscape and penetrated the thickest stone walls. There was no hiding from it, no way to block it out. Your entire day, from sunrise to sunset, was orchestrated by its rhythms. A single, steady toll might mark the hour for prayer, a gentle but persistent reminder of the spiritual order. But a frantic, irregular clanging sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through the entire community. That specific pattern meant only one thing: fire or invasion. It was a sound that triggered immediate, conditioned panic, sending people rushing from their homes to form bucket lines or bar their doors. In contrast, a slow, mournful ring, each peal separated by a long, heavy silence, signaled a death or a public announcement from the lord of the manor. It commanded a different kind of attention, a somber halt to all activity. Most powerfully, a distinct sequence of chimes at dusk signaled the curfew. That sound meant the town gates were closing, the streets were no longer safe for lawful passage, and all citizens were expected to be indoors. With that one auditory signal, an entire population was directed to cease movement. There was no need for soldiers to patrol every alley shouting orders. The bell did the work for them, its voice reaching corners a human herald could never access. It was a tool of magnificent efficiency, ensuring that the will of those in the tower could be imposed upon thousands, instantly and simultaneously. The bell did not request, it commanded. High in that stone chamber, the silent watchers were the system's vital pulse. These men were far more than simple bell ringers. They were carefully selected agents, chosen for their loyalty to the local lord or bishop, and often drawn from the ranks of trusted soldiers or clerks. Their role demanded a rare combination of skills. They needed the sharp eyes of a hawk to spot distant movement, the literacy to meticulously log every noteworthy event in a daily ledger, and an unwavering allegiance to the authority they served. A single lapse in their attention could mean the difference between a town saved and a town lost to fire or raiders. The watchman's day was governed by a relentless schedule. Shifts could last for hours, requiring constant vigilance in a space that was either bitterly cold or stiflingly hot, depending on the season. His world was the narrow window slit and the vast panorama it framed. He tracked the comings and goings of merchants, noting the arrival of unusual cargo. He watched for gatherings that seemed too large or too secretive, his hand always near the bell rope. Every detail was recorded, the scratch of his quill creating a permanent record of suspicion. A man seen loitering near the grain stores after dark, a whispered conversation between two rivals at the market, a cart that left the gates but seemed suspiciously light, all of it was evidence. When he observed something that breached the strict codes of conduct, a specific protocol unfolded. He would not sound the bell immediately. Instead, he might signal a guard patrol stationed below using a prearranged flag or lantern signal. His report, based on his written log, would then be delivered directly to the authorities. This report was not a mere suggestion. It was often treated as incontrovertible fact. His word, coming from that objective, godlike vantage point, carried immense weight. A single entry in his ledger could lead to a family facing a heavy fine, a merchant losing his license, or an individual being arrested on charges of sedition or theft. The watchman was the interpreter of the chaos of life below, and his interpretation could irrevocably seal a person's fate. This power made him a deeply feared figure, a man whose shadow, cast from the great height of the tower, fell long across the community. The silent power of the tower's gaze and its commanding voice were put to the ultimate test on the battlefield. Nowhere is this more starkly illustrated than in the story of Siena's Torre del Mangia and the fateful Battle of Montapati in the year 1260. Perched high above the city, the watchmen in this and other surrounding towers became Siena's first and most vital line of defense. Their unblinking eyes scanned the horizons for the one sight every citizen feared, the dust cloud of an approaching army. It was they who first spotted the vast Florentine force marching toward them, a discovery that instantly transformed the bell from a tool of daily order into an instrument of war. That first urgent peal was not a signal for prayer. It was a city-wide alarm that bought Siena its most precious commodity, time. With the enemy sighted, the tower's bells shifted into a precise language of military command. A specific, rapid sequence would have summoned the city's militia, calling every able-bodied man to his pre-assigned station. The bells did not just create panic, they directed it. Different ringing patterns could signal which gates needed reinforcement or which sectors of the city walls required more defenders. Inside the walls, chaos was transformed into coordinated action. The tower became the beating heart of the city's defensive nervous system, its voice reaching every street and square simultaneously, ensuring that the entire population moved as one. Civilians rushed to safety or prepared to support the defenders, while soldiers flowed to their posts with a speed that would have been impossible without such an efficient communication system. This superior surveillance and instant coordination proved decisive. The Florentine army, expecting to surprise Siena, instead found a prepared and mobilized adversary. The intelligence provided by the tower's watchmen allowed Siena's commanders to make strategic decisions that ultimately led to a stunning victory against a larger force. The battle was a brutal affair, but it was won before the first sword was drawn, won by the eyes in the tower and the voice of the bell. This case reveals the bell tower not as a passive watchtower, but as an active command center, a tool that could literally shape the outcome of history by controlling the flow of information and movement. It demonstrated that the same system used to monitor a merchant's trade or enforce a curfew could, in a moment of crisis, orchestrate the defense of an entire civilization. Yet the tower's role in warfare was merely its most dramatic function. Its most persistent and insidious power was exercised in the quiet, ordinary days, enforcing a rigid social and religious conformity. In an age defined by unyielding hierarchies and sacred dogma, the bell tower became the ultimate enforcer of the status quo. Its sound did not just warn of physical dangers, it dictated the rhythm of spiritual life. A specific peal would command the entire population to cease their work and proceed to mandatory church services. From his high perch, the watchman could then observe the streets, his ledger open. He would note which households produced a full contingent of worshippers, and just as importantly, which doors remained shut. A pattern of absence was not a private matter. It was a mark of suspicion, a potential sign of heresy or disloyalty that could be reported directly to the ecclesiastical authorities. The surveillance extended far beyond church attendance. The tower's gaze penetrated the very fabric of social interaction. In a society where a merchant was not supposed to fraternize too freely with a noble, and a peasant's interaction with a guild master was strictly governed by custom, the watchman could spot forbidden relationships. A clandestine meeting in a courtyard, an exchange of goods that seemed too familiar, a conversation that lasted too long between individuals of vastly different stations, all of it was grist for the mill of suspicion. This constant observation bred a deep and pervasive culture of fear. Neighbors became wary of each other, knowing that any unusual behavior might be seen and recorded. People began to police their own actions and words, engaging in a relentless self-censorship. The fear was not just of the Lord's soldiers, but of the invisible, anonymous gaze from above that could transform an innocent gesture into evidence of sedition. This made the tower profoundly dangerous to anyone who dared to think differently, to challenge established doctrines, or to dream of a different social order. It was a tool designed to crush dissent before it could even be spoken aloud. ensuring that the powerful remained in power and the boundaries of acceptable life remained firmly and terrifyingly fixed. This unappealable authority bred a unique form of psychological stress, a constant low hum of anxiety woven into the fabric of daily life. The medieval citizen did not live under a spotlight that was always on, but under a sky where a light could flash upon them at any second for any reason. This unpredictability was the core of the tower's power. You could never be certain if the figure you were speaking to in the market was a friend or an informant whose report would be carried up the winding stairs to the watchman's ledger. A simple disagreement with a neighbor over a property line could be twisted into an act of rebellion if seen from that godlike perspective. The bell itself was a source of deep psychological tension. Its sound was not just a command, it was an alarm of the unknown. A sudden, frantic peal could mean your street was on fire, or it could mean the guards were coming for someone, perhaps even for you. This constant state of potential crisis, of never feeling truly safe or private, took a profound toll on the human psyche. It mirrors what we might now call the chilling effect of modern surveillance, where the mere possibility of being monitored causes people to shrink their behavior, to avoid controversy, and to conform. The tower's greatest achievement was not the crimes it stopped, but the thoughts it prevented. It taught people to fear their own shadows, to mistrust their communities, and to accept that their lives were not truly their own. This environment ensured compliance not through the frequent use of force, but through the terrifying, ever-present specter of it, a weapon that required no maintenance and never grew dull. Every transaction in the marketplace unfolded under the tower's unblinking eye. The flow of silver and goods was as closely monitored as the movement of people, for economic control was a cornerstone of medieval power. From his high window, the watchman possessed a perfect view of the entire commercial life of the town. He saw the merchants setting up their stalls in the central square, the farmers arriving with carts laden with produce, and the haggling over prices that commenced with the morning light. His duty was to ensure that this bustling activity remained firmly within the bounds of the law, and more importantly, profitable for the authorities he served. He was the ultimate auditor, his ledger tracking not just suspicious behavior, but the very wealth of the community. His most critical economic function was observing the town gates. Every cart or pack animal entering or leaving was subject to tolls and customs duties, taxes that were the lifeblood of the local lord's treasury. The watchman's log would detail the arrival of a wool merchant from Flanders, the number of his wagons, and an estimate of their value. This intelligence was relayed to tax collectors below, ensuring the merchant could not underreport his goods or bypass the official gate. If a cart attempted to slip out through a smaller postern gate under cover of darkness to avoid paying an export tax, it was the watchman who would spot the movement and sound an alert. This system eliminated any chance for a merchant to operate outside the official economy, making the tower an indispensable tool for revenue collection. This control over economic intelligence allowed authorities to enforce strict regulations with brutal efficiency. Guilds, which held monopolies on certain trades, paid handsomely for the privilege. The watchman was their enforcer, ensuring no unlicensed carpenter sold furniture or no unauthorized butcher slaughtered animals. If a trader was suspected of selling short measures of grain or charging above the official price for bread, the report from the tower provided undeniable evidence. This power extended to crushing black markets, a clandestine meeting where silk or spices changed hands without the lord's tax. An activity that seemed invisible from the street was laid bare from above. The subsequent confiscation of goods and heavy fines not only filled the coffers of the powerful but also served as a stark warning to others. The bell tower, therefore, was not merely a watchtower against physical threats. It was the central instrument in a vast system of economic suppression, designed to ensure that wealth flowed upward, consolidating the power of the ruling class while systematically strangling the economic independence of the common person. The true cost of this surveillance was measured not just in lost liberty, but in lost opportunity. Yet for all its imposing strength, the stone fortress of a castle was a blunt instrument of power compared to the bell tower's subtle mastery. A castle keep was an island of authority, a fortified residence for the nobility that often stood physically and symbolically apart from the town it governed. Its power was direct, military, and reserved for moments of crisis. The bell tower, by stark contrast, was woven into the community's daily fabric. It stood not on a distant hill, but in the main square, surrounded by the homes and workshops of the very people it watched. Its authority was not distant and occasional, but intimate and constant. While the castle's soldiers might only intervene during a riot or an attack, the bell tower's influence operated every hour of every day. It dictated when the merchant opened his shop, when the laborer took his meal, and when the entire family went to church. This was a control that seeped into the soul of the community. The castle represented the power of the sword, a threat of force that was terrifying but intermittent. The bell tower represented the power of the schedule, the ledger, and the unblinking eye, a form of control that was so pervasive it became invisible, a part of the air people breathe. One ruled through fear of punishment, the other through the meticulous shaping of behavior itself. The bell's command was not a matter of brute force, but of brilliant engineering. Its power to reach every ear in the domain relied on a sophisticated fusion of art and science, turning molten metal into an instrument of unparalleled acoustic control. The men who crafted these bells were not simple blacksmiths. They were master founders, part chemist and part musician. Their workshop was a crucible where precise ratios of copper and tin were melted together to form bronze, an alloy chosen for its unique ability to produce a clear, resonant tone that could travel for miles without distorting into a muddy clang. The founding of a great bell was a community event, watched with a mixture of awe and apprehension, for the success or failure of the poor would determine the voice of their town for centuries. The shape of the bell was equally critical. Its flared profile and thick lip were not arbitrary designs. They were calculated to amplify specific sound waves. A bell that was too shallow would produce a weak, short-lived sound, while one that was too narrow would create a dull thud. The perfect proportions allowed the bell to ring with a fundamental tone, accompanied by a series of harmonious overtones that gave it a rich, complex voice. This complexity meant the sound could cut through the noise of a bustling market or the howling wind, its unique timbre instantly recognizable against the backdrop of everyday life. It was this acoustic signature that prevented confusion, ensuring that the alarm for fire would never be mistaken for the call to evening prayer. Finally, the placement of the bell within the stone tower was an act of acoustic genius. The bell chamber was not just a room, it was a massive amplifier. The sound waves generated by the swinging clapper striking the bronze lip would reverberate within the enclosed space, building in intensity before being projected outward through the large, open louvers. Builders strategically oriented these openings toward the prevailing winds and the most populated areas of the town, using the landscape itself as a natural megaphone. This careful orchestration of materials, shape, and architecture transformed the bell into a precision tool. It was a technology designed for one purpose: to bypass walls and distance, to enter homes and minds directly, ensuring that no one could ever claim they did not hear the command. This was not mere noise, it was social engineering cast in bronze, a permanent and inescapable reminder that authority had a voice, and it was always listening to itself. This religious justification transformed the stone tower into a sacred instrument. The very institution that often financed and built these structures, the church, presented its watchful gaze not as an act of political control but as a divine duty. In sermons and scripture, the populace was taught that God saw every action, no matter how hidden. The bell tower became the physical manifestation of this omniscience on earth. Its lofty position, reaching toward the heavens, symbolized a conduit between the divine and the mortal, and those who operated it were framed not as mere agents of a lord, but as servants carrying out God's own work. The bell that called the faithful to Mass was a continuous reminder of this covenant, a sound that linked the fear of temporal punishment with the terror of eternal damnation. To ignore its summons was not simply to break a town law, it was to risk your immortal soul. This theological framework made the system virtually unassailable. How could one protest against being watched when it was framed as protection for your own spiritual well-being? A person who objected to the watchman's ledger was not just a troublemaker, they were potentially a heretic, challenging the very order God had ordained. This fusion of religious and secular authority created a perfect circle of power. The local lord enforced the church's decrees, and the church sanctified the Lord's laws. The bell tower stood at the center of this alliance, its sound justifying a level of intrusion into private life that would have been intolerable under any other pretext. To resist was to sin, and to sin was to invite both earthly punishment and hellfire. This was the ultimate psychological lock, ensuring that the community would police itself in the name of salvation, all under the silent, stony gaze of the tower they were taught to venerate. But no system of control is ever truly perfect. Beneath the tower's stony gaze, a quiet war of ingenuity was constantly being waged. The very design of medieval towns, with their labyrinthine alleyways and overhanging buildings, provided the first line of defense. These narrow, shadowed passages, often just wide enough for a single person, created a world of shadows where the watchman's line of sight was broken. A person could disappear from the main square into a covered arcade, slip through a secret passageway connecting two buildings, or use a network of interior courtyards to cross the town without ever stepping into the open. This architectural resistance turned the city itself into a partner in subversion. Communication, too, went silent. Complex hand signals developed among guilds, allowing craftsmen to convey messages across a crowded marketplace without uttering a word. A tap on a window shutter at night, the specific arrangement of goods in a shop window, or the hanging of a particular colored cloth from a balcony all became a covert language, invisible to the watcher high above. More daring still were the direct attacks on the system's credibility. There are accounts of townspeople deliberately creating minor disturbances, like a small, controlled fire in a vacant lot, just to see how quickly the watchman would sound the alarm and how the guards would respond. By mapping these responses, they could identify blind spots and slower reaction times, knowledge that could be priceless during a real act of defiance. The most corrosive weapon, however, was misinformation. A merchant might spread a false rumor of a distant conflict or a coming famine, knowing the watchman would log it as intelligence. When the reported event never materialized, it slowly eroded the authority of the ledger, making those in power question the reliability of the very surveillance they depended on. And in some cases, the human element proved to be the weakest link. A watchman, perhaps struggling to feed his own family, might be persuaded to look the other way for a bag of silver or a promise of future loyalty. These acts of resistance, from the simple act of taking a hidden route home to the calculated risk of bribing an official, were not just petty rebellions. They were a testament to a fundamental truth that the human spirit, when pressed, will always seek to carve out spaces of freedom. The struggle was never just about avoiding the watchman's eye. It was about preserving a sliver of autonomy in a world designed for absolute control. The authority emanating from the bell tower was not just a matter of custom or fear, it was etched into law. Medieval town charters contained specific ordinances that transformed the sound of the bell into a legally binding command. These documents, the foundational constitutions of urban life, explicitly granted the bell and its keepers a remarkable level of power. For instance, a typical charter might state that once the final peal of the curfew bell had faded, the gates were officially sealed. Any person found on the streets after that moment, unless they were a doctor heading to an emergency or a town guard on patrol, was automatically considered a criminal. They could be arrested on sight, with the bells ringing serving as the sole evidence needed for their conviction. The law did not require a soldier to testify that he had seen the individual loitering. The sound itself was the proof of the crime. This extended to every aspect of commerce and labor. The bell that signaled the start of the market gave merchants the legal right to begin trading, and the bell that marked its end meant all transactions had to cease immediately. A baker selling bread after the market bell rang could have his goods confiscated and face a heavy fine, all because he had disobeyed an auditory signal. These ordinances effectively made the watchman in the tower a remote lawmaker, his hand on the rope capable of enacting and enforcing statutes across the entire town with a single pull. This legal codification was the final, crucial piece of the system. It elevated surveillance from a practice of control to an institution of government, granting a terrifying legitimacy to the watchful eye and its commanding voice. The tower was no longer just watching, it was judging with the full and unappealable weight of the law behind every toll of its bell. This architectural transformation was a direct response to the tower's growing strategic importance. The earliest belfries were little more than wooden frames, perched on a church roof or standing alone in a village square. They served their basic purpose to house a bell, but they were vulnerable. A strong storm could damage them, and more critically, they were easy targets for any disgruntled townsfolk or invading force who wished to silence the voice of authority. A single torch could reduce a wooden belfry to ashes, plunging a community into deafness and chaos. The shift to stone in the 13th century was a declaration of permanence and power. It signaled that the watchful eye was not a temporary measure, but a permanent fixture of life. Builders did not simply replicate the old wooden designs in a more durable material. They reimagined the entire structure as a fortress. The new towers were built to staggering heights, sometimes exceeding 200 feet, granting an even more commanding and unobstructed view of the surrounding countryside. Their walls were constructed of thick, load-bearing masonry, capable of withstanding not just the weather but direct assault. The winding staircase leading to the bell chamber was often built as a narrow, spiraling stone tube, easily defensible by a single guard against a mob charging from below. Access points were heavily fortified. The main door was typically set high above ground level, reachable only by a retractable wooden ladder or a narrow, easily defended staircase. Many towers featured integrated battlements at their summit, stone parapets with regular gaps called crenellations. These were not for decoration. They allowed watchmen to take cover while still observing the streets below, and if necessary, to repel attackers with arrows or dropped stones. This evolution from a simple bell house to a militarized citadel reveals a critical truth. The authorities were not just building a tower, they were fortifying the very instrument of their control. They recognized that the system of surveillance was so vital to their power that it had to be protected at all costs. The stone tower became a symbol of an unbreakable cycle, where the need for control demanded stronger fortifications, and those stronger fortifications, in turn, enabled even more pervasive control. Raising one of these stone giants required a fortune, a staggering outlay of wealth that only the most powerful institutions could afford. The soaring cost was not just for the stone itself, but for the armies of skilled laborers, the master masons who designed the intricate structures, and the teams of oxen needed to haul materials for months, sometimes years. When a community committed to building a bell tower, they were investing a significant portion of their collective wealth into a single, monumental project. So who exactly was willing to foot such an enormous bill, and what did they expect in return? The financing almost always came from a powerful alliance, a trifecta of medieval authority. The church provided a significant share, seeing the tower as both a spiritual beacon and a practical tool for ensuring piety and order. The local nobility, the barons and counts, contributed heavily, recognizing the tower's value as an instrument of military and civil control. And the wealthy merchant guilds, whose livelihoods depended on stable and predictable trade, often donated large sums, understanding that the tower's watchful eye protected their economic interests from theft and fraud. This was not charity. For each sponsor, the bell tower represented a brilliant long-term investment. The initial cost was immense, but the returns were perpetual. For the church, the tower guaranteed a captive congregation and the ability to monitor for heresy, strengthening its doctrinal grip on the population. For the nobleman, it was cheaper and more effective than maintaining a large, permanent garrison of soldiers. The tower acted as a force multiplier, allowing a handful of watchmen to control thousands. And for the guilds, the tower's surveillance ensured that all commerce flowed through approved, taxable channels, crushing black markets and protecting their monopolies. The true purpose of the tower is laid bare in its ledger books. It was built not for the benefit of the common person, but to protect and enhance the power and prosperity of those who already held it. The stone Sentinel, for all its religious symbolism, was ultimately a business decision, one that paid dividends in control for centuries to come. But the tower's dominion did not end at the city walls. Its sound carried for miles across open fields, a constant reminder to those living in scattered villages that the authority of the town was always within earshot. This auditory reach created an invisible fence of influence, tying the rural population to the urban center in a bond of enforced obedience. The watchman's gaze, though limited by the horizon, was extended through a network of human and technological proxies. On distant hilltops, smaller wooden watchtowers stood sentinel, their occupants maintaining a lonely vigil. At the first sign of trouble, a plume of smoke by day or a beacon fire by night would alert the main tower, a silent signal that could trigger the great bell into a peal of alarm. This system transformed isolated incidents into centralized knowledge. A band of poachers hunting in the Lord's forest, a group of peasants gathering to protest a new tax, or a smuggler's boat landing on a remote stretch of river, all could be reported and responded to with a speed that belied the era's technological limitations. The central tower became the brain of this territorial nervous system, processing information from its far-flung senses and coordinating a swift, unified response. This demonstrated a chillingly modern concept that effective control was not just about watching a single point, but about managing an entire landscape. The medieval surveillance state was not a local phenomenon. It was a territorial ambition with the bell tower as its unblinking, all-hearing capital. The ultimate consequence of being seen was meted out in the tower's very shadow. This was the grim final step in the cycle of control, where the silent observation from above culminated in very public suffering below. The same square where people gathered for markets and festivals was also the stage for punishments designed to be witnessed by all. A thief might be tied to a whipping post, his back lashed until it ran red, while the bell that had signaled his arrest now seemed to toll in time with each stroke. More severe criminals faced the gallows or the executioner's block, their final moments unfolding under the impassive stone gaze of the structure that had sealed their fate. The accused often did not travel far for their judgment. Many towers contained a dungeon at their base, a cramped, lightless cell where a suspect would be held awaiting trial, forced to listen to the normal life of the town continuing just beyond the thick walls, and to the very bell that would one day ring for their own death. This physical proximity was a masterstroke of psychological terror. The tower was not a remote symbol of authority, it was the direct architect of pain. A person could be praying in the church one week, and the next they could be standing in the square, looking up at the same tower now as their place of condemnation. This seamless connection between watching and punishing made the tower's power terrifyingly tangible. It taught a brutal lesson to every citizen. The eyes above were not idle, and the ledger in the watchman's hand was not just a record, it was a prelude to the scaffold. The bell tower thus cast a long, cold shadow, one that was not made by the sun, but by the fear of what happened to those who stepped out of line. The watchman's quill was as vital as his eyesight. Each day, he meticulously filled the pages of a heavy ledger, creating what we might now call a medieval database. These watch reports were not simple diaries. They were systematic records of everything that might affect the security and order of the town. He logged the weather, noting a sudden fog that could hide a smuggler's boat or a prolonged drought that might spark civil unrest over water rights. He recorded the arrival of every unfamiliar face, describing their clothing, their mounts, and the gate they entered. He even noted strange sounds like an unexplained shout in a distant alley or the sound of breaking glass after curfew. This was not random note-taking. It was a deliberate effort to capture the raw data of daily life, transforming fleeting moments into permanent, actionable intelligence. The true power of these chronicles emerged over time. By reviewing weeks or months of entries, the authorities could identify patterns invisible to the casual observer. They might notice that a particular merchant from a rival city always arrived 2 days before a spate of thefts was reported. They could see that gatherings near the tanner's quarter consistently led to complaints of foul odors and illness, allowing them to preemptively move the tannery to avoid unrest. This data became the foundation for strategic decisions. If the logs showed an increase in travelers from a region stricken by plague, the town council could order a quarantine before the sickness ever arrived. If reports indicated that certain streets were consistently avoided by patrols after dark, they could redeploy their guards more effectively. The watchman's ledger was, in essence, an early warning system built on information. It allowed those in power to move from reactive punishment to predictive control, anticipating threats before they fully materialized. In the hands of a skilled clerk, these handwritten pages could reveal the hidden rhythms and vulnerabilities of the entire community, turning the chaotic flow of life into a neatly ordered map of risk and opportunity. To live in the shadow of the bell tower was to be constantly reminded of your place. Its impossible height was not an architectural accident but a deliberate statement, a sermon in stone preached against the low skyline of thatched roofs and single-story workshops. In a world where most structures hugged the ground, the tower's aggressive verticality was a shocking violation of the horizontal plane of everyday life. It physically enacted the core belief of the medieval social order that power and divinity resided above, while the masses toiled below. The very act of looking up at it strained the neck, a small but constant physical submission to the authority it represented. This vertical hierarchy was a deeply ingrained metaphor. Just as God was believed to look down from heaven upon humanity, the Lord and the bishop looked down from the tower upon the town. The architecture made this abstract power dynamic, terrifyingly concrete. You did not have to imagine the social pyramid, you could see it, a stone needle pointing from the dirt of the common world toward the heavens of the elite. This visual dominance was crucial for projecting legitimacy. A ruler who could command such a structure, who could afford to build it and man it, was by definition a ruler ordained by both God and practical might. The tower's shadow, sweeping across the town with the sun, was a daily map of its influence, touching every house, every shop, every life. To be outside that shadow was to be outside the community's protection and order. This symbolism was so potent that challenging the tower's physical supremacy was akin to challenging the entire social and religious fabric. The structure taught a silent, brutal lesson with every glance upward. Your world was small, low, and observable. Theirs was vast, high, and in control. Even the most imposing stone giant had its blind spots. The surveillance network, for all its meticulous design, was startlingly fragile, a system of immense power built on the shaky foundations of human attention and the whims of the weather. A thick, rolling fog could transform the watchman's godlike view into a window of impenetrable gray, rendering the town below invisible. On such days, the streets belonged not to the law, but to anyone brave enough to move through the mist. The bells, so carefully engineered for clarity, would be swallowed by the dense, wet air, their commanding voice reduced to a dull, localized thud that failed to travel beyond the nearest square. A fire could start in a barn on the edge of town and rage unchecked until the flames were high enough to be seen from the ground, because the tower's primary warning system had been neutralized by a simple shift in the atmosphere. Heavy rain and howling wind created similar vulnerabilities, the noise of the storm drowning out the bell's signal, and the poor visibility hiding movements that would have been obvious on a clear day. The environment itself could become an accomplice to crime, offering a blanket of anonymity under which smugglers could unload contraband or rival factions could settle scores, all while the watchman stared uselessly into the gloom. Human failure was an even greater threat than the weather. A watchman chosen for his loyalty was not immune to boredom, exhaustion, or simple human error. During long, quiet night shifts, his attention might wane, his eyes growing heavy as he overlooked a flicker of torchlight where none should be. He could misinterpret what he saw, logging a friendly gathering as a suspicious assembly and triggering an unnecessary, panicked response that eroded public trust. More dangerously, the watchman could be corrupted. The very isolation that made him reliable also made him vulnerable to persuasion. A wealthy merchant, tired of paying gate tolls on his full shipment of silk, might offer a substantial bribe for the watchman to conveniently look away as a few extra bundles were smuggled through a postern gate. For a guardsman with a family to feed, the temptation to supplement his income by selectively editing his ledger could be overwhelming. This corruption created invisible cracks in the system, secret pathways of illicit activity that flowed directly under the nose of authority. History provides stark examples of these failures. In one documented case from a northern Italian town, a coordinated band of thieves exploited a week of persistent fog. They systematically targeted the warehouses of wealthy merchants, knowing the watchman could not see their movements. By the time the fog lifted, the thieves and their plunder were long gone, their success a direct result of the surveillance system's temporary blindness. In a more dramatic instance, a rival nobleman planning a surprise attack on a fortified town paid a disgruntled servant to drug the watchman's evening ale. The men in the tower fell into a deep slumber, and the assault began without a single alarm bell being rung. The town's gates were breached before the garrison could even be mobilized, a catastrophic failure that demonstrated the system's reliance on the alertness of a handful of men. These limitations reveal a crucial truth. The bell tower was never the perfect, all-seeing eye it purported to be. Its terrifying efficiency was conditional, dependent on clear skies and the unwavering vigilance of flawed human beings. For all its stone and bronze, the entire apparatus was precariously balanced, and when one critical element failed, the illusion of absolute control could shatter in an instant. The same principles that governed the medieval watchtower now hum within the servers of our digital age. The narrow arrow slit has been replaced by the unblinking lens of a closed-circuit television camera, its gaze scanning city streets and shopping centers with the same detached precision. The watchman's ledger, once filled with handwritten notes on merchant arrivals and suspicious gatherings, has evolved into vast databases that log our online searches, our financial transactions, and even our physical movements through the signals from our phones. The bell that commanded obedience with its peal now has a digital counterpart in the notification that buzzes in our pockets, a sound that demands our immediate attention and shapes our daily routines. The underlying architecture of control remains eerily familiar, a panopticon rebuilt not from stone but from code and silicon. Consider the psychological effect. Just as the medieval citizen never knew for certain if the watchman's eye was upon them, we navigate a world where our data is constantly harvested, often without our conscious knowledge. This uncertainty breeds a similar form of self-regulation. We might hesitate before searching for a controversial topic online, or we carefully curate our social media presence, not because a government agent is necessarily watching, but because the system itself might be logging our actions for some unknown future use. This is the modern chilling effect, the digital echo of the self-censorship born in the shadow of the bell tower. The goal is not to punish every transgression, but to shape behavior so that transgressions become unthinkable. The use of collected data for social control is another direct parallel. The medieval authorities used the watchman's reports to enforce economic regulations and crush dissent. Today, the data we generate is analyzed by algorithms to determine our creditworthiness, our eligibility for employment, or even our potential risk to society. A pattern of purchases, a network of online friends, or a history of travel can be used to profile us, to offer us opportunities or to deny them, all based on the same predictive logic the medieval clerk used when he noticed a merchant always arrived before a crime spree. The technology has evolved from parchment to artificial intelligence, but the ambition is ancient: to manage populations by turning the chaos of human life into a manageable stream of data. This continuity forces a profound reflection. The struggle is not against the technology itself, but against the concentration of power it enables. The medieval town had one central tower, its authority visible and unmistakable. Our modern surveillance network is decentralized, its components hidden in cell towers and data centers, making its influence both more pervasive and more difficult to challenge. The fundamental question posed by the stone giant 8 centuries ago is the same one we face today. How do we balance the genuine benefits of security and convenience with the preservation of our autonomy and our right to a private life? The bells may have fallen silent, but their message about the nature of power and observation continues to resonate, asking us what kind of world we are building with our own tools of sight and sound. The silent stones themselves testify to this history. High within the ancient bell towers of Europe, the evidence of this surveillance state is literally carved into the architecture. Archaeologists studying these structures notice one detail immediately: the deep grooves worn into the center of the spiral stone staircases. These are not the marks of casual visitors, but the result of centuries of watchmen, always taking the most direct path, their leather boots grinding the same path up and down, day after day, year after year. That physical erosion is a timeline of relentless observation, a record of human movement dedicated entirely to the act of watching. The narrow window slits, often dismissed as simple defensive features, reveal a more complex purpose under careful measurement. Their angles are not random. Each slit is precisely oriented to offer a panoramic, overlapping view of the town below, eliminating blind spots between key sectors like the market square, the main gates, and the river docks. This was not a design for archers to shoot out. It was a design for unobserved observation, allowing a watchman to scan the entire community without shifting his position. He could track a person from one end of a street to the other, his presence completely hidden by the thick stone walls. Perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from the bells themselves. When conservators lower a centuries-old bell for restoration, they often find inscriptions cast into the bronze that are invisible from the ground. These are not prayers or dedications to saints, but stark declarations of purpose. One bell from a French town bears the Latin phrase pro securitate civitatis, for the security of the city. Another, from a German burg, is inscribed with a simple, powerful message: I am the voice of order. These are not the words of a spiritual instrument. They are the motto of a tool of control, a permanent claim cast in metal about the bell's true function. Even the artifacts left behind in the bell chambers tell a story. Excavations have uncovered fragments of clay pots that once held lamp oil, allowing the watch to continue through the night. Pieces of slate have been found with grids scratched onto them, likely used for tallying carts or people passing through the gates. These humble objects, when pieced together by historians, form a vivid picture of the watchman's world, a world of meticulous record-keeping and ceaseless vigilance. The archaeology does not just support the historical records, it brings them to life, proving that the bell tower's power was not a metaphor, but a physical, tangible reality that shaped the very stone and bronze from which it was built. Folklore has cloaked the bell tower in a veil of romantic mystery, but the historical truth is far more calculated. We often hear that bells were rung to drive away plague or to cleanse the air of evil spirits, and while these beliefs certainly existed in the popular imagination, they were not the primary reason for the tower's existence. These symbolic uses were a comforting narrative, a way for a terrified populace to make sense of the terrifying power that loomed over them. The reality was that during an outbreak, the bell's primary function shifted from spiritual comfort to practical, ruthless control. Its peal did not ward off disease, it enforced a quarantine. The frantic ringing signaled the sealing of contaminated streets, the command for citizens to remain indoors, and the grim announcement of the dead being collected. It was a tool of isolation, not purification, used to contain the human vectors of the illness as much as the illness itself. Similarly, the idea of bells frightening away evil spirits mirrors the Church's teaching that the sound represented the voice of God banishing darkness. This was a powerful theological justification for the constant auditory intrusion. By framing the bell as a spiritual shield, the authorities made its secular power more palatable. The sound that tracked your movements and enforced curfew was the same sound that was said to protect your soul. This clever fusion of myth and reality made the system incredibly resilient to criticism. To question the watchman's surveillance was not just to challenge the Lord's authority, it was to risk appearing indifferent to your own spiritual safety. The true genius of the bell tower lay in this duality. It presented itself as a benevolent protector against supernatural threats, while its stone heart beat to the rhythm of earthly, absolute control. By separating the comforting folklore from the cold mechanics of power, we see the tower not as a mystical relic, but as a brilliantly engineered instrument for managing human fear and behavior. That stone silhouette against the sky is more than a historical monument. It is a blueprint for modern power. Walk through any major European city today, and you will likely find yourself drawn to the central square, the piazza or the plaza, invariably dominated by a tall structure, whether a clock tower, a city hall belfry, or the enduring spire of a church. This urban layout is not an accident of history. It is the direct legacy of the medieval bell tower's success. The psychological principle proved so effective that it became permanently encoded into the DNA of Western urban planning. The central, elevated point of authority from which order could be projected and observation maintained was established as the ideal model for organizing a community. This design ensured that the concept of a central, watchful power remained the literal and figurative heart of the city for centuries to come. This architectural inheritance carries a profound social memory. The very idea that a central authority has not just the right, but the responsibility to monitor public space for the collective good is a foundational pillar of Western legal and political thought. Our modern acceptance of police patrols, municipal traffic cameras, and building codes can trace a direct, if winding, lineage back to the Watchman in his stone perch. The medieval town charter, which granted the bell the force of law, established a crucial precedent that communal security could justify the surrender of certain individual freedoms. This was the original social contract forged in the shadow of the tower, where safety was exchanged for autonomy. The question was never whether observation would occur, but who held the keys to the tower and for what purpose. This historical trade-off echoes in every contemporary debate about privacy versus security, about the boundaries of government surveillance in an age of digital technology. We are still grappling with the same fundamental dilemma first posed by the ringing of the bell. How much of our own freedom are we willing to trade for a feeling of security? The stone giants may have fallen silent, but the long conversation they started about the architecture of power and the price of order continues to define our world. This silent stone legacy forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about power. The bell tower was not merely a building, it was a perfected system of control, an architectural weapon that masterfully blended sight, sound, and law to dominate the human spirit. Its visual dominance from on high created an inescapable panopticon, while its commanding voice orchestrated every moment of daily life with the precision of a conductor. This fusion of psychological intimidation and codified legal authority made it one of history's most chillingly effective surveillance tools long before the digital age. What begins as a mechanism for communal safety, for spotting fires and mustering defenses, can, with terrifying ease, be twisted into an instrument of absolute oppression. The very structure built to protect the community became the ultimate tool for monitoring and suppressing it. This is the cautionary tale etched into its weathered stones. As we now navigate a world of smart cameras, data tracking, and algorithmic policing, the ghost of the bell tower whispers an urgent warning from the past. Our own tools of security, often embraced for their convenience and promise of safety, carry the same inherent risk of concentration and abuse. The fundamental question remains unchanged: who watches the watchers and who controls the system that controls us? The long, cold shadow of the medieval tower challenges us to be vigilant guardians of our own freedoms, to constantly question the architecture of power being built around us, and to ensure that the tools meant to serve us never become our masters.